say when? Okay. You ready? Okay, so this is the old guy again. And I'm going to briefly describe to you what happens when a head gasket starts to blow hot, explosive gases into the cooling system where it doesn't belong. Here's my way of drawing you a quick diagram. A lot of people that don't know engines, you have a crankshaft at the bottom and you have a piston in each cylinder. Now I'm just going to draw a 4-cylinder for right now. And it has its connecting rod, and its little connecting rod doesn't hook to the middle of the crankshaft. It actually hooks out off to one side as the crank turns. That's a poor picture, but hey, so the rod's a little bent, but don't give me a hard time about that. The cylinder head sits on top. And the spark is introduced right in here. Intake manifold is where the air comes in with a throttle plate valve. That's how you control a gasoline engine. How much air you give it is how much oxygen you give it is how fast it's going to eventually get going. Normally, when you're just cruising along and you don't have your foot on the gas and the throttle's not open very far, what's going on in here is a relatively weak explosion because you're not getting a lot of oxygen. So this explosion that's going off in here, the pressure's not that high. I've seen compression on an engine when it's revved up as low as 15 to 20 pounds if it's revved up in compression. But when you open the throttle to go up the on-ramp or to go up the side of the mountain a little more, this explosion intensifies. It gets stronger and hotter. And right at the top of this cylinder is where the head's bolted on. And you have great big head bolts that come down through the head, and they bolt the head down onto the top of this explosive cylinder, just like a bullet in a gun, just like the barrel of a gun. The piston actually takes the place of the bullet, but it's attached to something. Anyway, when you're climbing a hill, you've got your throttle open, you have more oxygen coming in. This explosion becomes so intense that its temperature can reach, let's just put a low on it. Let's just say 3,200 degrees. I don't know how to write degrees, but we'll put it like that, sort of. That's a percentage, but anyway.
It's a little dot up here.
A little dot?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just scratch this out. Okay. So, you'll have to forgive me. Bill's just learning how to teach again. I used to teach years ago. So anyway, you're climbing the side of the hill. You've got your foot down on the gas pedal. You've got way more oxygen coming in. She's pulling you up the side of the hill. And when that explosion goes off, if your head gasket is getting weak, it's just a ring. A head gasket right at the top of a cylinder is just a narrow little ring that goes right around the top of that cylinder, and you're lighting the explosion in the middle. That little ring, when it gets old and you've got your foot on the gas and you're climbing the side of the mountain, when this explosion goes off, it can blow little tiny air bubbles under that ring. And those air bubbles, when they blow under the ring, they go out into the cooling system, which is the rest of the block. And out here is all the antifreeze that's supposed to keep this all cooled down so that this does not melt. Because you can melt this. If you drain your block and your coolant is clear down here and you don't have any coolant in your motor and you're driving it down the highway and these cylinders are up out of the coolant, I call that thermonuclear meltdown. Because if there's no coolant in the block and you're driving it, 32 to 4,500 degrees is what this temperature can hit. That can make all this start to glow. But anyway, back to my subject. Head gaskets. When those bubbles get blown out into here, they take up space. So instead of you having coolant up in the top, up here, you have a bunch of foamy air bubbles. And it starts getting even hotter. And the result of this is out in your cooling system where your radiator and your radiator hoses are, where you usually have coolant at the radiator cap. When you take a radiator cap off of a radiator, you'll have superheated bubbles of extremely hot hydrocarbons that came out of here in the forms of bubbles. They can accumulate at the top because they're air bubbles, and they start to take up space, and they push the coolant out into the bottle or out on the ground, and then the top of the cooling system starts filling up with superheated gases. And if you try to take the radiator cap off when you've done this, climbing the hill on your engine, and you take this radiator cap off of this, you're taking your life into your own hands, because if the pressure has built up really high, which it does, and you pop that, you can get burns beyond your wildest dreams. I mean, you can get burnt extremely bad by coolant that is 2,500 degrees, not 250, 2,500. And that's where the hot gases come from, and that's why the car starts to overheat, because this little ring gasket that goes around the cylinder has gotten tired and old, and the cylinder head keeps expanding and contracting, especially an aluminum one, and it eventually crushes that gasket. And it's only nature. It's nature. The owners don't usually actually do anything wrong to cause a blown head gasket, and you can actually get this condition and you can have it for quite a while. But that is a short little tutorial on where the head gasket hydrocarbons, where the hydrocarbons can come from in a cooling system. And I just drew the side of a little 4-cylinder. There's a lot more elaborate engines out there, but they all have something in common. They can all develop head gaskets, from BMWs to Volkswagens to Subarus to a lot of cars. They can develop head gasket problems when they age. And it's not anything that the owner's done to cause it. It's just nature. And I hope that one helps a few people. Goodbye.